Hello, it's Devlin from Motorwork. We are a European automotive shop and we wanted to make a video on what to look out for if you were interested in buying one of this generation E70 BMW X5s. This is one of the quintessential BMWs. They ran from 2006 till 2013. You'll still see lots of them on the road, still putting miles on them. And with multiple BMW technicians and regular customers who have these coming through our shop, as well as the fact that this is our personal courtesy vehicle, we do feel as though we can give you some helpful tips and knowledge if you're looking at one of these cars, so that when you go and check it out, you can make a qualified purchasing decision and make sure you're not stuck with the lemon. Let's dive right into it and start looking at some of the potential flaws. There aren't too many things on the exterior of the X5 to have to look out for specifically. You'll want to check it around like most used cars for any scratches, dents, or dings that happened by the previous owner, but there's not too many trim pieces that come off on a regular basis that we would try to recommend to you. The only thing that we do normally see is these hatches can make a loud creaking or groaning noise when opening and closing, or actually when you're driving around. This is caused by them becoming out of alignment. It's not a complicated fix. If you do hear it, all you would need to do is bring it to your local shop or at Motorwork. We've done it a few times if you are interested in having that done, and we can make an adjustment to the hinge placement of your hatch to make sure that it stops making that noise. The hatch is pretty much the only body concern that we regularly see that is out of the ordinary. Once you're in the vehicle, there are a couple things you want to check out for as well. You want to make sure that the glove box works as it should, as well as this leather here isn't peeling up. It's a very common thing we see, and it's kind of annoying to replace, but this leather here can peel up. Just make sure you feel around the edges that it wasn't previously stuck down right before you came over to look at it. The next thing you want to do is test the sunroof. The rails on these sunroofs or the housings can crack, so sometimes they don't open correctly. So you want to make sure that the full functionality of the sunroof is working, so that you don't have to figure that out once it's already your car and then to find out later that it doesn't work. So this one goes all the way back and all the way forward. I can close it and open it, no problem. The iDrive center control screen in these vehicles is sometimes people's Achilles heel. It's for some people's tastes, it's not for others. What you just want to do is make sure that everything functions, specifically this controller here. We've replaced quite a few of these over time and they just happen to wear out. So you want to make sure that every single directional function and the click function works, as well as the buttons around it, or you might have to get one replaced. They're kind of expensive to buy, not terribly expensive to install, but it's something you want to check out for just to make sure that it's working. Under the hood, you're going to be met with a couple of different options of engines. If you're lucky, it's going to have a straight 6 gas or a straight 6 diesel engine. These are the two that you want. There's a 4.4 liter or 4.8 liter V8. They're great engines to drive. They're really nice, but honestly, they're very problematic. We find lots of issues with their timing chain, cylinder scoring, valve cover leaks, and we find issues with their valve seals, so they burn excessive amounts of oil. Overall, we would steer you away from a V8. As much as they do sound good and they drive really nicely, the twin turbo straight 6s, BMW knows how to make a straight 6. They have their own issues that we'll talk about right now, but realistically, whether or not it's a diesel or gas, BMW makes a solid straight 6. We'll talk about the diesel one right now. Emissions control problems are the only things you're really going to see. I mean, we've never really seen those BMW diesel engines come in for anything but emission control problems. They're reliable, they're bulletproof, they make nice power, they take a tune really well if you want it to go faster. They're really solid units. You just want to make sure there's no emissions codes with them, and they don't have a history of emissions codes, because that's the biggest thing you'll run into. These straight 6 gas engines have a couple of problems. Their eccentric shaft solenoids and sensors sometimes go bad. That's due to some oil seeping into the sensor generally. You want to replace the sensor as well as the seal on the valve cover, because that's what causes the oil to leak into it. That's usually what causes the failure. The valve cover gasket itself is recommended to be replaced, and because the valve cover is plastic as a whole, we want to replace the whole thing because they can warp. So when you put it back onto the vehicle, it's going to be warped and it might leak right out of the bat after you replace the seal. So if you do a valve cover gasket, and the eccentric shaft sensor seal all at the same time, you can get rid of a lot of the problems this vehicle might have. Common signs for the eccentric shaft seal to be bad is a long crank, either when it's cold or warm. Any sort of long cranking before it'll actually start is generally a bad sign for that. These can also have evaporator issues, as well as intercooler seals failing. You can hear that with low boost, or you'll see that with low boost codes, oil seeping out of different areas, or you'll see it with excessive amount of oil in the intake. So you want to get that checked out. If you want to pull things off, you can. We would just recommend getting one a pre-purchase inspection. Take a look for oil in the intake tubes. The number 6 cylinder on these cars also has somewhat of a tendency to get oil starvation, or at least get too warm and then cause scoring and knocks. So you do want to listen for any abnormal noises when you have the hood open to make sure that it's not having any issue in the number 6 cylinder. Another good bet would just be to have it inspected by a mechanic to listen for any noises as well. These engines are direct injection, so like any direct injection engine, you're gonna have carbon buildup on your intake valves. Because the fuel doesn't spray over the intake valves, they don't get cleaned off, carbon builds up on them due to the EGR and the emission system recirculating through the intake. So because of that, every about 90,000 miles, we wanna get it cleaned, or you wanna get it inspected to see if it needs to be cleaned. That's gonna require the removal of the intake manifold to check the intake ports on the cylinder head, and likely walnut blast them to clean them. If it hasn't been done, budget it to be done, or if you notice rough running, then it might be something you're running into. Water pumps on these straight sixes are another common issue that we run into. You want to make sure that it's cooling well, that there's history of the water pump being done at about 100,000 miles. If there is not, it's likely something you'll want to get done for safety, or you'll just want to keep on top of the cooling system and any performance with that system. Another problem is these bulkhead plastics. They probably are cracked. It's a very, very common problem for them. They are frequently replaced in our shop. They will crack, and what happens is it allows exhaust gases into the cabin. So if you're noticing a very engine-y smell, exhaust smell, especially if it's a diesel, a very diesel-y smell, it's these bulkheads that are quite likely cracked. You will just need to get them replaced. They're a little bit annoying to replace, and they cost a little bit of money. So if you do see any cracking along here on any of these three, talk to the owner, budget it into the price. And of course, you're going to be doing your regular checks, which is your cooling system to make sure it's not milky, your oil to make sure it's not milky, all of those systems to make sure that there's no mixing of a bad head gasket. Not a terribly common problem on these vehicles, but something you want to look out for as well. Now that we've seen the exterior, the interior, and under the hood, and you've known where to take a look for, what we're going to do is head over to a drive to see what it's like, to talk about a couple of common issues you might hear or see or feel when you're driving the vehicle, and then we'll take it back to the shop to throw it on a hoist to show you a couple of common problem areas on the underside of these vehicles that you can probably see if you crawl underneath it when you're looking at it, or things that you want to talk to the tech if you're getting a pre-purchase inspection done to make sure they check those problem areas. Let's go for a drive. So of course the X5 is no different than any other vehicle. You want to make sure there's no warning lights, no warning systems that when you go through the center infotainment system, that nothing pops up saying, hey, I'm broken. You want to check also before you head out the park brake on these. They are fairly prone to failing, so you'll need a motor if it doesn't work. So just make sure that it engages and disengages. Test. Switches can break too, apparently. So that may be a common problem. It might just be this car's problem, but it broke while I was doing this video. So I just wanted to let you know that the parking brake switch can also fail, potentially. Now that you're driving, there's a couple things you want to look out for. I mean, make sure the transmission shifts correctly and smoothly. ZF made the transmissions for these cars, and honestly, they're bulletproof. We seldomly have problems with them. They are fine if you put a tune on it, they're fine if you drive it regularly, they're fine if you tow with it. The transmissions, ZF boxes, are really stout units. So there's not much to check other than make sure there's history for fluid changes and filter changes and leak changes, and make sure that the fluid isn't old. Not leak changes, sorry, leak fixes, if there ever were any. Just make sure it's been serviced and maintained regularly at the intervals it should be. Other than that, if it drives well, smooth, shifts well, it's likely a good unit. They're super stout and they don't seem to have any problems in the long term. From there, you want to feel and listen for a front thrust arm bushing failure. This is a clunk you may hear when going from accelerating to decelerating. It is a clunk you will hear going over bumps. They're a high wear item. They're not an expensive item. They're easy enough to do. It's just something you might run into. If you are looking at a 4.4 or a 4.8 liter V8 car and you want to see if your valve stem seals are leaking, idle the car for about 2 to 3 minutes on the side of the road and then put it in drive and roll into it fairly heavily. If you see a large puff of blue smoke come out the tailpipe, that's a very high indication that your valve stem seals are bad. It'll leak at idle and then it'll burn off when you roll into it. It is a heavy repair job that will cost quite a bit of money. Either budget that into your sale price or just accept the fact that you'll have to be adding oil when you own the vehicle between oil changes, because it will likely use more than it can between the allotted oil change time. And then, as I've stated in other videos, you do want to roll into it once or twice to make sure that it goes through the RPMs cleanly, that it boosts under load if it's got a turbocharger, or that it revs out its RPM range freely. Timing chain rattle, boost leaks, low boost at high load codes can all be triggered by doing this once or twice. You're not going on a joyride in someone else's car, you're just testing this once or twice to make sure that under all conditions the vehicle is functioning. Once you've done that, you continue on your drive. Now you feel like you've driven the car, you still like what you're in, The exterior, the interior, the engine bay, and the controls and driving all seem up to your liking. I do recommend trying to stick your head underneath it and take a look at things if you're not getting a pre-purchase inspection, or I highly recommend getting a pre-purchase inspection to check the underside of this car. Because this one's high enough, I'm going to put it on a hoist and point out the areas that you want to be looking for if you are crawling on the ground, or if you have the ability to get your mechanic to show you underneath the car. I'm going to show you specific failure points on this generation X5 that you can look for when you get a pre-purchase or are looking at it, to make sure that you don't have bigger repair bills that you won't be able to see from the top side of the car. So we're going to go put it on a hoist now. So we've got the truck up on the hoist here just so you can see it better, and this is what you'll be looking at from your own perspective. This arm here is that arm that I was saying gets done all the time. It's replaced constantly. The bushing goes, and then you have to replace it. That's what you were listening for with the clunk when driving over bumps and going around corners. Under here, and this is kind of why we want to recommend getting a pre-purchase inspection. Under here, if you have an X5 5-liter or an M, there is a active sway bar, and those are notorious for leaking, but it's only on the X5 M or the X5 5-liter. Front and rear active sway bars, they leak a lot, so it's something you'd want to get inspected if you're looking at that particular generation. A little farther back, we're here at the transfer case. What you want to check for here is any signs of leaking. One thing I didn't mention when we were driving is do hard, low-speed corners, so very tight, low-speed corners, to see if you hear any groaning or whining noises from the transfer case. That's another sign they aren't doing very well, but look for leaks if you can. Finally, we're at the back of the car. What you're looking for is if you have air suspension, try to see if you can see any of the bags and see if there's any cracks or dry rotting, or you can hear any leaks from the air suspension. It's kind of hard to tell, and sometimes they can look bad but have no problems leak-wise. You just want to function test the air suspension fully and through all of its modes to make sure it works. And then you would also look for leaks around the active sway bar on the back if this was an X5M. You want to look for rear diff leaks. Those are fairly common problem areas on these, so you want to make sure there's no diff leaks. As well, if you can see it, it's difficult to get your head in there, but they are fairly known for cracking springs on the back of these. So if it has cracked springs, it'll affect your ride quality. It might sit back lower because the spring is holding the ride height up. So if you notice it's got a rear squat and there's no other signs, it's possible that it's a spring that is bad. We hope this was helpful in your quest to look at a BMW X5. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We are always happy to answer questions on these vehicles. And once again, we do recommend that whatever your local qualified shop is, whether or not it's us, that you do get a pre-purchase inspection just so they can go further in depth into the vehicle to make sure that you're not getting a lemon. We hope this video has helped when doing a walk around of it so that you know preliminary before you pay for an inspection whether or not you're even interested at all. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.